Daddy eats lots. Daddy eats lots. Daddy eats lots. Munch, munch, munch.
Hello and welcome to Daddy Eats Last, where we discuss the challenges of being a man in modern society and whatever the hell that even means. I remember that, even after 4 months. I'm Kane, and joining me this evening are Ryan and Matthew. How are you both, gentlemen?
I'm very well, thanks. Kane, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Very well.
Likewise. Doing very well here. Very well indeed, actually. Yeah.
Well, we're going to discuss this evening for this episode of Daddy Eats Last is women's sport. Now, by women's sport, I don't want to get into the whole, I don't want to get, we're probably only doing 3 or 4 more episodes. So I don't want to get cancelled in the last couple of episodes and give my definition of what a woman is. Yeah, we're just saying women's sport. So when we refer to women, it's just women's sport, whatever that kind of means at the moment. Will that get me cancelled?
I don't think so.
The thousands of people listening.
Exactly.
But I think whatever externally is defined as women's sports is what we'll be talking about, given that we are 3 dudes and we're probably not qualified to speak about anything beyond spectating.
Exactly. So this has got nothing to do with if they've got penises or not have penises. This is purely about our enjoyment of women's sport and what women's sport we like, and Matthew's perspective with being the dad of girls, what women's sport and how it's changed probably since when Matthew was little as well. Nothing to do with penises on the participants or not on the participants, just so we're 100% clear. I just want to say penises once more before we get into it. Penises.
Our legal team's happy. Got that out of the way.
Yeah. It's really topical because Women's World Cup of soccer is on in Australia at the moment, and it's on TV and it's rating really well. There's 75,000 the other week to watch Australia beat Canada. Up in Brisbane, or 50,000 up there. There's 75 in Sydney. Like it's just there's a lot of people going to it, and it's awesome.
It is, mate. It is. It's and I think I heard somewhere that Matildas jersey was outselling either the men's Australian rugby jersey or men's Australian soccer team jersey at some point.
Not surprising.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, what a time in sport, for Australia and for women, but probably more specifically, I guess, young women being able to, see their idols or see women, taking the big stage. 2 World Cups, netball, soccer, and then everything else is going on as well.
There's pathways as well now. Like you basically, every female sport, there's a pathway. If somebody who wants a young girl out there, again, whatever that means, penis or no penis, for a young girl out there who wants to sort of maybe go down the pathway of elite sport, there's so many different avenues in sports where they can actually access now and make a living doing it in a lot of cases, which was the problem sort of even 5 or 10 years ago. There wasn't the money there to be able to actually, make a living playing these sports as a female, unfortunately.
And I think it's really great to see that, this is a sporting segment. I love my sport, but this is the fastest growing macro sporting segment out of any sport there. You look at the women's AFL competition, you look at the Matilda situation that's going on now. Netball's had a complete revive. Swimming, athletics, rugby, sort of more and more sports are just escalating, and people are going in absolute droves. I mean, 75,000 people to a World Cup game in Australia is phenomenal, and millions more around the world watching it on TV. I saw in cricket that they're now, I think it's in a couple of years' time, but they're putting some things in place that, the cash prize for winning the T20 World Cup or the 50 over World Cup or the Test World Cup will be equal between men and women. So the team will win the same amount of money, whether it's men and women. So it's just really, really cool and a probably long overdue situation. But definitely a really exciting time just for sport and physical activity and movement and excitement and just bringing people to a game. Yeah, I think it's great personally.
Yeah, Maddie, I remember when we were doing a podcast a while back, and your eldest daughter was quite upset when one of the AFLW women changed teams from the Brisbane Lions. She might have gone to, might have gone to the Bulldogs or somewhere like that. So is she really into she's really into sport? Is she specifically into like the female sport, or does it not matter to her?
That's a fantastic memory. Yeah, Caitlin Ashmore went from the Lions to North Melbourne, and she teared up over that. So, yeah, Mia's more into women's sport. So it started, I guess, with AFL women's was probably where it all kicked off, and then as she started playing netball, that became more front of view. But I did mention the other day. So as I said, she plays netball quite a bit, and she's actually quite good at it, which is nice to watch. And we've been watching the World Cup, and she has been following the Suncorp Netball Super Series with the state-based teams. We watched that quite a bit, and I guess explained to the other day, like when I was a kid, obviously there was women's sport around, and girls could play sports, but it wasn't to the extent where it was on so many different channels and platforms, and you had the ability to actually watch it. Which I think is just so fantastic for these kids. They can, really get inspired by what, and also we've noticed as well, you get a lot of backstories too. We're sponsored by KO, but with KO especially, and in the netball, I'll just hone in on that. They have so much content about, how girls are coming from junior level, going through the ranks, what it takes to sort of climb the ladder and get to a diamond, an Australian team, and things like that. So I think that all that's there for these kids to just absorb, and it's just fantastic. It just blows your mind on where we've come from, where we are now, and where we can go.
I was actually listening to a podcast yesterday. It's the economics of everyday things, and they were talking about as an American podcast, and in America there was a lady who opened a sports bar for women's sport called the Sports Bra. And, people writing off, no one's going to go to that. It's packed every single day. And she's started to actually open other ones around the country there because they couldn't she's telling the backstory of how they went to a bar to watch the women's basketball NCAA, so like the college system finals, and they had to ask the barman to turn it on, and some girls made a 3-pointer to win the game on the buzzer, and they're cheering. Everyone's looking at them like going, oh, what are they cheering at? Because they're watching women's sport on that had to basically get streamed into a specific TV channel. So she started her own sports bar to show women's sport. Like it's amazing. There's that much access to that on TV now, given how far behind it was. Just never on when we were kids. Even the netball wasn't on.
No, that's right. It wasn't. No, it was all just men's AFL. You had basketball, but no netball. And I don't know about you boys, whether it's because I've got two girls seeing all this, but whenever I watch a Matildas game or a netball game with the Diamonds or something, AFL women's, we will find the Lions for quite a bit, and when they lost a couple of premierships and finally got one, I don't know. There's something that gets you a bit more emotional than watching a man's sport, whether it's not, again, because I've got two kids or two girls, sorry, or how hard these women have, had to try and get the exposure they've got to get to where they are, whether it's something like that. But I don't know, there's something sort of cuts a bit inside, and it's like, this is really exciting.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that. Obviously don't have two girls. May do in the future, but we'll see. And I do think there'd be an aspect of that, but I get what you mean, because sometimes when I've watched those kind of events, be it AFLW or cricket or something like that, maybe it means just that little bit more sometimes when you watch it, because you almost like it's when you watch it like a bit of an underdog. Maybe that's not the right thing to say, but it's that they've had to graft for this a lot harder, and that only now, and even still, like it's still got a long way to go before getting the parity on sponsors and economics and pay and all that kind of thing. But it's probably just that little bit of like, these guys are like what footy players back in the 70s were. They're playing, but you know that they're going on Monday, they're off to work, and they're still doing a full-time job, or they're doing bits and pieces like that. And there's just a bit more maybe rawness and grassroots to it all. But yeah, I'm a bit like you, Matty. I kind of like look at it and go, geez, this is great. Like it's really, really impressive, and exciting. And hopefully there'll be aspects of that get squared up over the coming years, and it doesn't stay like that. But I think the fact of that it is on the stage that it is now in such a short amount of time, and you talk about that story in the US, Kane, with that bar. I just feel like we're just also at the beginning of this, and personally as a spectator and just a big fan of sport in general, I'm certainly just cheering for it to grow and get bigger and bigger and more exciting.
Yeah, as somebody who watches a lot of sport, it's great because there's more choice if you've got like both genders, and again, nothing to do with penises, both genders. You got options to watch both versions of it. There's still some, the best way of putting this, like there's some women's sports I enjoy watching more than the men's version, and there's some versions of the men's sport that I enjoy watching more than the women's version. It's just purely my tastes, and I think that's okay. Like I love watching women's hockey. For instance, I never really watch hockey, but when it's on the Olympics, I love watching the women's hockey. I think it's an amazing sport. Ryan, having played it for years, I probably should have taken a bit more of an interest in it. But it's just that there's certain sports that I enjoy the female version of, and certain sports I prefer the male version of, if you know what I mean. And that may change over time.
Is that like from a quality of the product? Is that what you sort of mean?
Possibly. It could be. Like sometimes I'm just like, I like watching the women's cricket. I like watching the men's cricket as well, but I quite like watching the women's cricket. Like maybe it's evolved a little bit further. The women's cricket has been maybe a bit more mainstream for longer. The women's netball's bloody amazing to watch. Like even it's the state comps and the international comps. Maybe it's because they're further down the line. Those ones which have been, I guess, around for longer, I find they're fantastic. Where the ones which are maybe just coming along, like the AFLW, even the Matildas a little bit, like they're getting a lot more exposure now, and growing. I think in 5 or 10 years' time, I'll be more into them than I am now, as opposed to the other ones which are, have been doing, have been, I guess, around for longer, if you know what I mean.
I mean, it could be the fact that like I'm certainly I'm a big cricket fan, and I'm across the Healy, the Perry, the McGrath women's Australian women's situation with ins and outs of injuries and those kind of great players that are all in the women's team as much as I am with like the men's team and who's in and that. And I'll read up probably as much on both sides, and hoping that Australia always beats England, whether it's men's or women. But I think what I've also found interesting is playing footy for the last couple of years in clubs now that have both really good women's competitions and men's competitions has been very different culturally to say footy a decade ago when I would play then. And I think arguably for the better. I think the between just having that more breadth and more people involved and just more energy and just different perspectives and so forth. I think it's just really, really good for sport in general. And that's probably something that I guess with the emergence of this, I think is actually really good for male sport as well.
I think it's a sense of community as well, Ryan. Like these clubs now, whether it be cricket, AFL, hockey, etc., it just brings, I guess, more of the family can be involved in the one sort of sport. Like you're not just only being able to have the sons play football and the girls play netball. They can do vice versa and they can do both. So the whole family can get involved. Like I know you just mentioned about football and your sort of following the cricket as well. Like I'd probably say in my life, like 10 years ago before I had kids and living in Melbourne, I guess as well, it was more, I was more sort of AFL centric, watching what was going on there. But that's sort of probably dropped off and taken a back seat to netball because I guess my oldest daughter's so involved and she knows all the players of certain teams, and you just sort of get caught up and swept into that sort of that path, I guess, of knowing what's going on in that sort of arena, other than, rather than AFL, where no one in. I've got a younger boy who's five, so he plays AFL and he's getting right into it, but he's not at the stage yet I can have conversations about, what's going on, who's in, who's out, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's yeah, I guess it's just what's around.
I tell you what, I went to an AFL game yesterday. I went to Hawthorn versus Collingwood, and I recall the language that when I used to go to the football as a kid was not quite so. Every second word was F this, F that behind me. There's a kid sitting next to me who would have been, sort of 11 or 12. And the guys behind him are just like, F this, that guy's effing hopeless. I'm like, okay, like I haven't been to an AFL women's game live. I'd imagine that sort of thing isn't as prevalent. It seems like a better, more family orientated crowd, where AFL just seems like the Wild West still.
That's interesting because I would have thought that I would have hoped that it might have cleaned up. I went to a game when I was back in Melbourne, albeit North Melbourne and St Kilda, so probably not nearly as many of a crowd as your game.
It was a Collingwood game, so that might explain it.
It was also a Collingwood game, but I think yeah, I mean, I think that is just legacy that will eventually die out, or I hope anyway, because I think that's what I found. Like when I was playing footy a decade ago, in the locker rooms, the language was markedly different to what it is now. And I think that's a very good thing because it's a much more wider, as you say, Maddie, community. And, the women's team had just played, and maybe the men's 2 team is on the pitch at the moment and the women's 1 team is about to go after, but everybody's there at the ground. And I think certainly when that happens, I think things clean up a bit for the better. And I'm like, I go to North Melbourne in the AFL, and for those who don't follow the AFL that are listening to this, we are very much a bottom team, unfortunately. We are an underdog team, but one of the things that I'm like super proud of is that our chairperson of the entire club and our CEO were the first AFL club to have both those roles filled by women. And we have a very good women's team and so forth. And I just think hopefully, Kane, like, what you're saying, and that's certainly what I experienced when I'd go to a football game 10 years ago. I'm hoping that 10 years from now, when I can take my kid to a football game, it is like there'll always be an aspect of that. You just have to look at sport across the world. But I'm hoping that it will be the minority, not the majority. And it looks like it's going that way.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, you're probably right. I don't think it was a gender related issue. I think it was just a Collingwood related issue.
That's got many decades to change. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I don't think it'll ever change. But I think with this one takeaway from that, women's sports really aspects of it is really enjoyable, and the fact there's pathways now for young girls and women to make a living and do what they love. I think we all can say here to that.
Absolutely.
Indeed.
And Ron, I can't believe you left out Ash Gardner. I could watch her bowl spin all day. She's a gun.
She is a gun, indeed.
That's all for this week. We'll be back with another episode of Daddy Eats Last soon. Until then, stay safe, stay well, and just be yourself. Penis or no penis. That's all.
Bye bye. Bye bye.